Back to order. So we're calling the meeting back to order, at which point, and for those of you who are watching at home with some popcorn, hopefully, we were discussing the increase and maybe having a deferral. That motion for deferral for a later date failed, at which point we have the item back on the table, and there were some proposals occurring. Councilman Dobler, if you would like to start.
Just a question for the city manager. You listed five, I believe it was five priorities, 300 days cash.
Right.
And you might want to quickly go through those again. Can you prioritize those priorities? I mean, what are the most important?
Correct.
What's the top three for you?
Wait 1 second. I can find my notes that I made earlier. As I sat down with staff and we talked about what we need in order to be able to continue to function and analyze the priorities that we have. When we look at what we can, when we can give up as far as when we do an operation, so when we walk in, we make changes to the formula, the model, and we start looking at that we can reach and go further with accomplishing things by doing less cash on hand, in other words, cash projects. So we look at cash projects as being something that we would look at reducing from 25% to 10%, which then gives, cash is the most expensive way you pay for a project from the standpoint of a rate, because you have to use more of your rate in order to make that purchase. Long-term, it can be more expensive because you have to use the financing, but when you're going out and doing a project, the initial hit to that budget is smaller. Then when we look at that, we can look at the days cash on hand. Right now, we're at just about 185, I think, and we would look at, we still need to maintain that. It has been deemed sufficient. We'll probably have to have the days of cash on hand in more in the 200 range. But we can, we looked at wanting or accomplishing 200% of our debt coverage ratio. That can be more like 145. That's a way that we can cover down to, not as much cash as required. So I think, for us, we would look at doing less projects in the way of cash projects, and then look at the combination of the cash that we have to have in the bank relative to covering our debt service ratio and also a number of days cash on hand.
What, if I could, what would that do to the rates?
Well, from the numbers that were initially looked at, for example, I do know one formula was put through the model, and Nicole can answer the question better how the model was spitting out information for her. But for example, we looked at going from 25% to 10%, looked like it was going to allow us to reduce our rate from 9% to about 7.5%. That ring a bell, Nicole?
That's accurate.
Yeah. What? Accurate.
That's
So 9% to 7.5% would be what the change would be to the rate for the water and also for the stormwater.
How about the cash on hand? Or was that included?
That's going to be impacted by that because of that. I think that really is a number that reduces as well, because we will have to reduce the amount of cash, days cash, and also what we're having for debt coverage, because only using 10% for cash projects, we're already going to have that number really reduced. I don't think we're seeing another larger increase in reduction in rate in order to keep. The next thing that, and the worst thing that occurs is the replacement cycle. We want to get that replacement cycle up in a lower number of years, if at all possible, and wanting to do everything that we can to get that replacement cycle, which is why we look at using debt financing in order to accomplish the continued replacement cycle. Because that's where we'll see operational savings by having fewer water main breaks to fix, having a more efficiently run operations with our plants. Those types of things will allow us to pull a long ways ahead.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Then I would like to make an amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to amend the ordinance to be 7.5% for the full 5 years. Well, he said it kind of has a domino effect, right?
It'd be water and wastewater, or water and stormwater with regards to the 9%.
We need a second for the sake of discussion. Okay, we have a second. Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Just, I guess, a point of clarification. Mr. Trout, is that correct? Was it 7.5? Is that what you
Yes,
said?
7.5 was the predicted number that the rate would go to by using 10% for cash projects.
And, okay, great, thank you.
Councilman Heller?
A question if I could. Is cutting the cash a false economy in terms of then reducing the amount of work we would do, as well as pushing, then delaying whatever that work would have been done, and also bonding it, and therefore having it cost more to do the work?
Well, I
That's
think-
what I'm hearing, and to me, that's a shame. It's a false economy for a couple of bucks.
Well, but I think the issue that we have is that what we're seeing is an impact in our operations by having things not fixed. In other words, we
Agreed.
have, and if we can continue to replace at the proposed $6.5 million towards the replacement of water lines, that's 6.5 miles of water lines that's getting fixed that, as a new product, will be less likely to break, especially with the way we're factoring. You know, we're looking at the fact that we have 41 miles of water line that is aged out and that needs to be replaced. And so by being able to tack that behind amount of 41 miles, we start having an impact on not having to use additional funds in our operations to fix those lines that we know are old.
If I could clarify, I thought what you were saying was you were going to leave the amount that you were going to bond, the amount of bonded work, the same, but if you were going to cut the dollars, you were just going to cut back on the cash.
We
Maybe
cut
I
back on the
misunderstood.
amount- No, I mean, the bonded amount would be covered and increased, and they would, with that change, it does not change the amount of work that could be completed. That's the beauty of the model that we ran with them, is that she only changed that factor, if I remember correctly, correct? Was the factor, only factor you changed was the 10% cash?
On that model, yes.
Yeah, so it allowed us to continue to keep the same replacement cycle. In other words, she changed one factor out of our 4 primary goals, and that was not spending 25% cash, instead spending 10% on cash projects. And so that would allow us to continue to have the same replacement cycle. It sets it up for that. So it probably would be borrowing more in order to accomplish that. I think that's what you were wanting to know, is it would probably require additional bonding in order to continue to keep that replacement cycle, because the money's got to come from somewhere.
That's what I thought. Thank you. I guess I just want to express that we've lost 4,000 in population. We are working now on doing our very best to make sure that we add population and there's more people to pay for all of these things. But I'm very nervous about, I'm really proud that we haven't raised the property tax but once in the last 12 years, and I think that, for me, that's been a priority so that we could do these water rates and get the water and storm sewer lines fixed. But I don't want us to increase our indebtedness. Thank you.
Councilman Dobler?
So just so I understand, the rates as they will stand at the end of 2020 will allow you to replace 4 miles of water line a year?
Correct. It's about 4 million that we're utilizing, yes.
And the rates that you're proposing at the end of 5 years, I assume, will allow 6.5 miles per year?
Yes,
So that's 2.5 miles,
additional.
and you estimate $1 million a mile, roughly?
That's what we've used, and there was a little more detailed estimate that was provided, which was about $845,000 per mile for 12-inch line or less, and then 1.7 for the higher. And so we averaged it out to be about $1 million per mile.
And so on the water side, rates, total revenues going from 40 million to 60 million at the end of 5 years. So an increase of 20 million, correct?
Right.
2.5 of that's going to replace water lines, or 3 or 4, or something in that neighborhood is water line replacement, correct?
Correct.
What's the rest of it? I mean, obviously, there's inflation,
Honestly,
operations are going to go up, but
The total list. Yeah. Nicole? I have not, I couldn't tell you the specific numbers on the other
it's
projects.
a tough question, but
offhand.
that's, I
18
guess that's
million.
where the disconnect is for me a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah, go ahead.
And I apologize, I didn't hear the last of the conversation as I was talking back there, but the question came up about current rates after 2020 allowing us to do $4 million of water main replacement a year. That is not accurate. After 2021, we no longer can meet our debt service coverage ratio. We will not be able to issue debt.
Well,
So the 4 million that you're using for replacement right now is all revenue bonded, is that correct?
There's a small portion that is cash, so there's about $500,000 a year.
Okay.
That we would still be able to.
Majority of it.
Yeah, about $500,000 we'd still be able to do. Because remember that the current CIP is built on that 655 assumption in there.
Right. So lowering from the 300 days of cash to 185, to 200, I guess, was the discussion, or lowering from 200% debt coverage to 145%, does that still allow us to sell bonds?
Yes, if I heard the question correctly, yes.
Those were the parameters.
Yeah,
I remember.
at 200 days cash, that still provides us the appropriate revenue to be able to meet our debt service coverage ratio requirements.
Okay. And is it a true statement that we can't issue revenue bonds, or they'll cost us more money? Because
At that
at what
point,
point we're not able to physically issue revenue debt?
we can still issue. It may be more expensive.
Right.
It's when that ratio drops below 125% that we're no longer able to issue anything. And I believe, if I recall correctly in the presentation, it showed that point for the combined utilities in 2021. So that's the point
Right.
that's no longer available.
And we would likely be in technical default.
Yes.
So it's not
Which-
just that we can't issue more, we would be violating our bond covenants that we've given our investors
At 125%,
below that. Yeah.
but we're talking 145.
But if you're looking in the out years without the rate increases that are included in our model, you will eventually fall below that covenant. And just one of the other items when you asked about if it's more costly, the city itself, there's a variety of metrics that go into a rating. And some of the economic metrics, we obviously are lower on the scale than some of our peers. And so part of the reason we're in the AA category, or AA3, is because we have strong cash position, we have a good debt service coverage. But I think as you start to whittle those away, we will face additional pressure from our rating agency. And I wouldn't rule out some sort of impact from that, which would then increase our borrowing cost.
So I think the question I asked the city manager earlier was, what were some of the minimums that you could live with on cash on hand and debt service coverage? You mentioned 200
days.
200 days and 145%.
I think that's what we were looking at as a minimum, correct?
And that yields the 7.5%
Yes.
increase. So that takes us down 1.5% on those two. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Jensen?
Thank you. Do you have any RPI reviews scheduled for any of the utilities departments now? I don't recall that any of those have been presented to us yet, but it seems to me like we haven't looked through that department to guarantee that we're doing everything as efficiently as we can yet. And that concerns me a little bit, that we're asking for more money before, not that I don't fully agree that we need a rate increase to cover our debts and continue fixing the system, but how are we going to guarantee that we're as efficiently as we possibly can be to the community at the same time we're asking them for more money?
I don't recall that we have scheduled any of those. Right, but we did do the stormwater permit process. That one was one that has been an issue that we've looked at related to developers and something that we can do a better job on. And so that was recently done. It was a very exhaustive one. It ended up taking basically it's 5.5 days to 6 days to get it completed, very involved. I think that there have been some changes with regards that Bob and his team have already made related to taking a look at how we're doing our digs under different breaks, the processes that we're using there, hiring the private contractors to come in and do renovations or the restorations versus us doing them ourselves. During when we were in backlog mode, we were able to bring in our wastewater crews to help with taking care of the backlog in order to do better. And so they have been looking at some of those things, even though we haven't done an RPI for any of those events. I think it's something that it's just a matter of, we've only been able to do 12, or actually we're at about 10 right now with RPIs. And so it's just working through each of the departments. Department was dealing with other types of things and not able to participate in an RPI yet.
And I recognize that, we see it, I believe it's an 8-minute presentation on what, as you alluded to, takes 5 days, but I'm so impressed with how you've been able to use that process to streamline efficiencies in so many departments.
Well, I
given
think,
that this
yeah.
one is close to insolvency.
I think that,
Crisis.
that whole process of how to fix a water main break, for example, is one that is tailor-made for review. And it's just a matter of time and getting it through the list with others and going through that process.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's critically important for us to do sooner rather than later, because there could be huge savings there we don't know. I doubt it's enough to cover the current situation we're in, but if we can replace even one more mile of pipe a year without spending more money just from saving the process, I think it's well received. Thank you.
So at this point in time, we have a motion to increase 7.5% water and 7.5% stormwater for 5 years.
And a 2% wastewater.
For water.
1%.
Huh?
1%.
Isn't it, it's 2%. 2% wastewater.
Sorry, this thing is wrong. That was something, that was an email I got. Okay.
Additional discussion. 7.5 for 5 years for water and stormwater and 2% for sewer. Councilwoman Hiller.
I'm interested in hearing more comments from people that were that were interested in the 3-year program instead before we vote.
Councilman Padilla.
Well, I don't want to go over old ground because we've talked a lot, but I do think that I understand what Deputy Mayor is doing, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I want to be able to give the resources that are necessary to make significant improvements into our situation. But at the same time, and I think Mr. Jensen spoke to it, because we spoke a little bit about that, rather than reducing the amount, reducing the number of years with a real focus on department efficiencies and auditing of those monies so that not by the end of 3 years, but during every year that we're doing this, be able to evaluate how successful that amount of money has been in getting us to our end goal. And I think by cutting back the money, we kind of hamstring that opportunity for the improvements to come at a rate that we need. And so for me, I understand Deputy Mayor's efforts, but I would more be more inclined to support the rate increases across the board for only 3 years. And so I probably would vote against your amendment. And if it passes, fine. If it doesn't, then I would offer that amendment myself.
Deputy Mayor?
I thought that, well, I do think that that's a happy medium for the citizens in the city. And I also think we don't have to get up to the max that we need right now. I mean, if you, yep, it'd be great to have the 300 days and the, and all that, but I don't think we need to, all of a sudden need to be perfect and at the expense of raising the rates for the people. So that was my thought behind that.
Councilman Jensen?
I would offer a friendly amendment to do the rate you proposed, but for 3 years. I think that matches, to some degree, demonstrating that there is urgency in fixing the system by allocating additional funds, but at the same time, I don't feel that we've done a deep enough dive in those departments to look for efficiencies. Again, not because anybody just chosen not to do it, that the process takes time, and there's certainly a lot of moving parts over there that need to be addressed. So if that would give you some time to do some additional investigating, but yet stabilize the system and continue incremental improvements, then I think we would be ready to come back to the community and more fully discuss what it's going to take to keep the water flowing.
Would you accept the friendly amendment?
Yes.
And the second was by Councilman Dobler. Would you accept that friendly amendment? So, okay, so then what we have in front of us is, rather than 5 years, 3 years, and again, 7.5 for 3 years wastewater and stormwater and water, and 2% for sewer. Okay. Councilwoman Hiller.
One last double check with the city manager on that. I
On
mean,
this proposal?
yes, versus
Well-
going at the 3 years at that higher rate in terms of what we need to do and
I think-
what we're ready to do.
I think the thing that it does, and you heard it from both our finance officer and our business manager from the water utilities, is what it does is it puts us on a more precarious level with regards to where we'll end up as far as where the rating agencies will consider us. It provides us what we want, what I consider to be our highest priority, which is the replacement cycle that we desire to get after some of this work that needs to be done. But we're going to be kind of on that razor edge relative to the number of days cash on hand and the percentage of coverage for bonding. And so I think that it provides us what we need in order to be able to do that. But it's obviously something that we're going to have to really monitor very, very closely as the years go on. And so obviously we can bring that to you, and if there's, the council, if there's a mid-3-year correction that's required, we'll have to bring that to you. I think trying this at this level is worth considering and pursuing in order to be able to move forward. It's a step in the direction that we were asking, which was to be more aggressive relative to our replacement cycle in those particular utility accounts. And so we'll evaluate it. And with 3 years, we'll know some answers as to whether that's going to work or not. And I'll bring it a mid-correction if there's necessary. If it's not working and it's not providing us what the desired results are, along with us looking at the efficiencies, the comments that have been made, we can take, we'll dig deeper into that relative to it, show you where we're at with that.
Thank you.
Seems like we're talked out. And then at this point in time, we're getting ready for a vote on the amendment. And the amendment would be 7.5 years. I mean, 7.5% for 3 years for water, stormwater, and 2% for sewer. Clear as mud? No pun intended with the water?
Good we have, if we don't invest something.
Okay. All right, we'll proceed with voting.
We have 9 yes. Nine yes, Mr. Lister voting no.
9 voting yes, the motion passes. At this point in time, we move on to item, oh, that was just the amendment. Yay. Uh-oh. Now we have the document as amended. And we already had a motion and a second for that. So at this point in time, we proceed by voting.
Unless there's only one who knew.
We have 8 yes with Mr. Cohen and Lester voting no.
8 having voting yes, the motion passes. Now we move on to item 4, which is a non-action item, if the clerk would read.
A is discussion regarding the request to acquire property for construction of a new fire station on Southwest 6th Street.
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier this year, we talked about the opportunity to improve our fire protection coverage in Topeka by building a new fire station on the northwest side of town. By building a fire station in this area around 6th and Fairlawn, we can reduce our response times from around 9 minutes to 4 to 5 minutes in many of these parts of the community. We can also reduce the amount of calls that are handled by some other stations that have to cover this area and better utilize staff from Fire Station 11. This will allow us to provide better fire protection to the area without severely affecting the area covered by the current Station 11. Also, as we look at this particular station and the staff that are in Station 11, which are many of our rescue units, those units will then be able to be better utilized by the fact that they'll be closer to the highway and also closer to their distribution for jumping into the water if their water rescue unit is needed. All that being said, though, in order to even consider that station location, we've got to move forward in the next step in the process, which is considering the location. And the particular location that was originally proposed was not available for us. And so we have determined another location that's very close to where it was originally designed to go. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Peak, and he'll explain to you some of the particulars about that piece of property and our desire to gain ownership in order to move this project forward.
Good evening, governing body. As the city manager indicated, we've been working with the fire department on identifying a site for the new fire station. Background, as you heard, was this is started back in 2009. We had a site that was donated by the Sisters of Charity, but it had a reversionary clause that if the fire station was not built by 2018, we lost access to that site. And so after that, we had money budgeted in 2018 for construction of the fire station, and so we've gone back to the table to find a different site. So before tonight, we have worked we worked through an analysis with the fire department to look at those response coverage times. We identified available parcels within that area and worked with the fire department on a priority. And basically, we've identified lots 6 and 7 within the subdivision on Southwest 6, just south of the governor's mansion that's identified in your packet in the site location map. And we have worked with the property owner. We have reached a negotiated price of $290,000 for these 2 parcels, and we're recommending that that price is within the appraised range of properties out there and so acceptable, and based on the discussion of the body, if it was favorable, to come back next week and actually ask for approval. The other thing that I would say to you is that we've also been looking at the budget for the project. So land was not included in that project budget in 2018. And now that we're a couple of years down the road before moving to construction and talking with a design consultant, we probably will need a budget amendment to deliver that project, construction value, designing to fit a new site, as well as adding the land acquisition. We don't have a hard number for you, so rather than guess at that, if the body desires to move forward with this purchase, we'd work to bring back that budget amendment to you during the CIP process. But I did want to kind of give full disclosure that we're going to work to deliver this project, but we anticipate a budget amendment would be needed as well down the road as we get closer to construction. And with that, I'd stand for any questions that you have.
Questions for Dr. Peak? Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I had one about, now, when we bring this up for action, are we just talking about the purchase of the land, or are we talking about closing fire stations and moving personnel around and things like that?
I'll cover that part. The intent right now is that where the current fire station 11 is, personnel from that particular station would move to what I would consider this, it's been called Station 13, but actually it's really a new location for Station 11. And so we'll be moving personnel, equipment, et cetera, to the new location and taking 11 out of use. And we would then utilize it for some other activities. Storage for both police and fire have had a need and actually had a capital improvement project on the books for storage. This facility would allow us to move into that, to move that equipment that we were looking for as a separate storage unit to the old Station 11 and utilize it. Also, with its setup, it would work for doing some types of training events, for mobilizing, say there was an activity for police that they needed to have a place to co-locate before moving out. There's a lot of options that would then be available for use of that as an off-site location for activities for both police and fire. So we would continue to utilize the old 11 for good activities, saving us money and potential future projects that we were looking at.
Just for reference, what is 11? Where is 11?
11 is up on Lower Silver Lake Road.
Okay.
Councilman Dobler.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Peak. What was the process you used to identify this particular property? Did you look at all the vacant property in that immediate area? And
Yeah, so we basically, working with our GIS information, so taking kind of the county data of whether it was developed or undeveloped parcel, overlaying the response time service levels needed from fire, and kind of creating some map layers to say, here's those sites, and then we kind of, process elimination, highlighted some of those. Some were not as close access-wise to, say, the interstate at this facility or to a main arterial. So when we're looking at being able to do response time, and so that kind of led us down this path to this parcel. And just for reference, it is just east of where that Sisters of Charity parcel. So we're in that same vicinity as the previously proposed site.
Great. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I have lots of questions, because I would not be for this if we're going to close 11, until I get a whole lot more information about response times to my district in Oakland and North Topeka. So I think most of my questions are going to be for the chief, or maybe for city manager.
Yes.
I know
Chief?
there's GIS time, and then there's drive time, and then there's response time. What's the difference?
What's the difference? On GIS times, the response time is from when they leave the station to get to the location of the emergency. That's the response time.
Okay, so if you add in the call coming in, the 911 operator putting it in the computer, the calling the station and getting the alarm out, how much time does that add?
Well, we only looked at it from when we received the alarm. We don't know how long it takes for them, but at this point, we use our times. 1 minute dress out time to get out the station on average. Well, that's the goal. The goal is to get out the station within 1 minute of
Okay.
receiving the call.
Can I continue?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so if you say then the response time is 5 minutes, it probably is more like from when the call came in, 7 or 8 minutes.
If you use that formula, there's
Right.
different, and Chief Adams here, he's the one that put together the GIS response capabilities and the times of when they started and then when they would stop till we get an effective firefighting force on the scene.
And do you have data? Do you have actually data? Can we get that data?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I would like to have that.
I would only caution you, you need to be specific about what you want to see. When you look at national standards, the NFPA quotes you want to be in the 4-minute travel time. You can add in alarm time, you can add in turnout time, and it changes everything when you look at that. So we tried to look at just the drive times, which is the standard that's out there the most.
Well, but there's going to be a big difference, because then I need to know if 11 isn't there on Lower Silver Lake Road and 11's, and well, and the news station is taking the calls, 1 is out on something else, it's going to take them a long time to get up north. I really am not interested in how many calls the station has had, because 1 call is enough for me. If that's my family, that's 1 call. But they did have a lot of calls. So I guess I need to know, what is the response time from the news station up to, say, Red Bud Court or up there, as opposed to the 11 now? And then I guess, how are you figuring that? Are you actually driving it to say? Are you looking on a Google Maps? Or how are you actually going to, from the news station, going to be able to tell me how long it takes?
We used GIS drive times when we evaluated all of this time. We also backed that up with, we looked at when Station 1 was out and 11's ran that call. Station 11 would run that call to see what the second in time was to those calls in that area. And they were pretty consistent with being what GIS drive time showed us. So we can, we can get you either way on that information.
Yes, because there's going to be a difference. And then how many calls do you expect? If this is the busy station and downtown's a busy station and they're always out, then we only have 1 going north, correct?
If in that scenario,
I mean,
we
they're
are
the
always going
busiest.
to, we're always going to send the same amount of companies north. It's where they're coming from would be the difference.
But you can't. If these are the 2 busiest in the city,
Which
the new one and what's not 6-1, whatever's right down here, your station?
7, 8,
Seven.
7 and 8s are the 2 busiest
7 and 8 are
stations,
This is
and
not
followed by
busy.
5s and 4s, which are the inner city.
Okay, so we only have 1 then covering all that area.
What you would have
Ones.
covering that area, the immediate ones would be Station 1. If they were out, you have Station 3 located by headquarters. You have Station 6 in Oakland, which would cross over. Station 4 coming from the inner center coming in. Station 7, if you were talking about the
Those are long
west
time,
side.
that's a long time.
They're all a long time. That's why we looked at this. We tried to even the coverage out in the city. This had the least impact on the city. Every study we looked at going back into before '09 when they did that, everybody showed the same inconsistencies or deficiencies in all 4 corners of the city. And we looked at the call volumes, how everything that was there, to see what those drive times were, how big of an issue it was. we identified as the biggest issue, and I think it showed up and it's growing ever since that time as a concern. So it's not that we need a station there, it's how do we man it is what I'm hearing. We still need to cover that area. When we do with moving Station 11, it was a very insignificant time change. The area immediately around Station 11 is what had the biggest increase in time. Everything else, because of its proximity to the interstate, times were very similar as near as we could tell.
Yeah, and I would beg to differ, but if, I remember Colson had the idea of building this new one and then moving 11 over here somewhere and not doing away with 11. Is that no longer, I mean, at one point, that was what was needed. That was the best answer. So how come all of a sudden that's not the best answer anymore?
That's still a possibility. That would require an additional fire station
Right, I
and the
mean-
same resources. Yeah.
We were looking at the need, based on the availability of our budget, to add an additional fire station, set of personnel and equipment, et cetera, was not something that was something that we could consider at this point.
Well, and you know what, the budget's important, but saving people from fires and that call you is more important.
I understand that, but what are we doing for the west side, and what we have for requirements is there as well. And
Exactly.
so, you know, if you look at best case scenario, yeah, it would be great to have that potential to be able to do so. But at this point, I think that that's one of those areas where we would have to have some serious discussions as a governing body, whether adding another fire station and everything that goes with it is something we're willing to do. And it would be costly. Adding probably $1.5 million to probably per year, and it would be fixed. It wouldn't go away. That's what we'd be adding and deciding we were going to do.
Well, I absolutely agree we need to build one. I mean, I agree with that. But I do not agree with closing 11. I think, because then you're at 6th and Fairlawn as opposed to Lower Silver Lake Road. There is a distance here. You can't say it's about the same time, because it's not. There's miles apart. Have you talked to anybody at the NIAs over there in North Topeka, what they think? Or have you talked to the firefighters that are on the ground, what they think?
They know that we were looking into this.
Okay, but what do they think?
Yeah, they would like to have another fire station with more people, but obviously budget doesn't permit that. We were trying to operate utilizing, just reallocate resources to cover that area, as well to be able to come back and cover the Silver Lake area, you know, and it was our best option. The last 5, you know, studies have shown we need something on the northwest side.
Right, I agree.
You know, and that's why.
I agree. And I understand, but I still would like, before I can even go with this, are the actual time differences if 11 wasn't there. What is it gonna take from the new station to get way up north? The times. And I can Google it. I don't want it Googled. I want it actually getting on the highway and exiting the highway. Because when you go, then you're gonna have to go all the way down here. You're gonna have to turn around. You're gonna have to go back up here. There's a big distance there.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could impact your travel time. I mean, even 11s right now, they could get stopped by a train heading out to the northwest part of the city to cover that area. You know, where they are now, they could see if there was a train on the lines and then take around 75.
Yeah, but that takes longer because I've already talked with that about somebody. That
Yeah,
added a minute or two.
and, Deputy Mayor, but the thing is, if they had an option to take the highway, they could get around that train stop where before they're stuck there waiting on the train passing. There's all sorts of things that we could scenarios we could run into, but we just looked at this using our resources, reallocating them, and covering, making sure that there was an equal cover with that northwest and that part of the city, and then look to see where we need to go from there.
Right, but I'm the family up north, and I want to know, I mean, that's fine what you looked at, but I want data. I want real data, not, well, we looked at this, and this is where, I want to know exactly if you got into an engine there and drove over there compared to getting in an engine 11, how long it's going to take. So if I can get that information.
We can look at that. We've looked at the numbers. We've looked at the numbers.
Like I said, if these guys are going to be so busy, and that's why we're building this, I don't know how they're going to take over where 11 was then.
I think one of the things you're missing, the new 11 will be busier than they are now. It's not a
Right.
case of that they will be so busy. They're going to take calls and they're going to even more evenly distribute the load. 7 and 8 are now responding to that area most of the time. We're going to reduce the number of calls that they have to do. They're going to be more available to assist in other areas. I think it provides us a more even coverage for each of the stations that we have.
That's not what I remember the discussion before. That's not what I remember. That I thought it was we had to build this to take the load off, but then to cover more area. And what I also saw was the calls have doubled at 11 since 16 to 19, right?
And I might address that, yeah. We did have that question on the discrepancies in the calls. In 2016, we went to a new record management system, the Aegis New World, and some of that data didn't transfer cleanly. And we started it in March, April, somewhere around there. So those numbers aren't great for 2016. IT can get those numbers for us. They still have that data, but it takes a longer time for them to put that report together. So in the couple of days, we used New World data to put this together. So that's why 2016
So we really
numbers are a little
don't.
bit
If you
off.
look down, everything doubled.
Yeah, consistently down, just
Yeah.
because of the timing of in the year that came
Well,
to
if you can
be.
give me more specifics, as a family that lives up north, make me feel okay that I'm going to be protected as well as if 11 was still there.
We'll work on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Cohen? To
Thank
be
you, Mayor.
followed by Lesser, to be followed by Jensen. Which, by the way, at some point, we're going to have to extend this meeting. It's 9:46.
Understand. I'll make mine brief, Mayor. Just by the looks of what's happening north of 24, it almost seems like we would need another station over there. Now, I don't know anything about this, but do we have a strategic plan that shows our growth and things like that?
I mean, we obviously have, the strategic plan is to cover the calls, as those numbers have risen over the years. You know, that we have to adjust to that. And that may be reallocating resources as one part of the time, increases like at the Wanamaker area. You know, the properties up there, the call load has risen there, and there's longer travel times because there's no station out there. So this is just what we're doing. We will look at every year, every 5 years, look at the plan, the strategic plan, and decide it's going to be up to this governing body. If we present to them, we're going to need another station because population growth, industrial growth, commercial growth, residential growth, and we're going to have to adjust to it.
Every 5 years?
That's-
Maybe a copy of this strategic plan would be good, too.
I did send.
That's all I had. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Could we get some other questions, and then we'll come back to you?
Can I just, it's one sentence. However, that was for administration, not for the whole fire department.
Councilman Lesser, to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
The only other thing I would say to point out in Deputy Mayor's comments about response time to the family in North Topeka, and I get that, but we also are going to see an increased time to, we're definitely going to see an increased response time to the dense area of West Hills, the dense area of Prospect Hills, we're also going to see a definite increased time to the 4,000 employees at security benefit if there's a fire, the 4,000 employees at Federal Home Loan Bank, the movie theaters, all those things. So I get that. The proximity and the thought process of how quickly this is to I-470 as well, I would venture to guess if we're backing up and going to Oakland, I'm just guessing, but I would guess the response time from 11 would be here on 6 compared to Lower Silver Lake Road. I would guess would actually probably be quicker because of the ability to use the highway and stuff like that. So I think we have to look at this in totality, and then the density of the population and what we're seeing rather than just that response just in that lower area.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Jensen?
Thank you. So I appreciate you guys bringing this to us to discuss. The thing that terrifies me is moving resources south of the river. I recognize that we're blessed to have multiple bridges that cross the river, but those are huge bottlenecks, and I'm really afraid of relying on those very small pathways as the gateway to get into North Topeka. I appreciate that we can use the freeway, but I've driven a fire truck on a freeway, and it's not pretty. Even brand new ones, they're very heavy. They don't turn well. It's not going to handle the curve on the viaduct at speed at all in responding someplace. So I guess I'm interested in what your plan is to handle a situation where bridges are not usable to get across the river.
If we were talking about all three bridges that give us access, we still have.
What's that? Kansas Avenue is dead now, obviously. If you want to use Topeka, you've got to get off the freeway, which takes a considerable amount of time. And so really, your only option is 75, unless you want to go all the way around. I mean...
Where I was headed with that scenario is we do still have partners, Soldier Township, Silver Lake, that can come into us that we have mutual aid agreements with through state statute. May not be the same resources, but we do have resources out there that are on that side of the river if we needed that.
And that's true, but, I mean, part of the reason why you guys are great at what you do, you're also professional firefighters, and those other resources, a lot of them are volunteer. I've been a volunteer firefighter. It's not, you're not as well trained. I mean, that's just the reality of it being a volunteer operation versus a professional credentialed firefighter, and especially with ALS coming online. I don't know, guys. I don't know how to address the bridge scenario and making it better below the river. We're just going to have so little resources for such a large population above it. And I recognize that that's not going to be an issue most of the time. But in disaster response, most of the time doesn't cut it. It's the one time it doesn't work. How do we plan around the one time?
And we can't predict where a call's going to be.
Agreed.
I mean, obviously,
Agreed.
or the type of call. We just respond to whatever the call is the best way we can.
Sure. I'm wondering if even if it was on 75, just on the other side of the river, that would still be to some degree in the general area, but if that bridge is out of commission and you have to go north, at least you're on the other side of the river. Because we
Councilman
have
Jensen?
assets south of the river.
We need to make an extension
So moved.
of the meeting to go past. So we have a motion by Councilman Jensen to go, we have a motion by Councilman Jensen to go past the 10 o'clock threshold so that we can continue our business. It was already seconded by Councilman Dobler. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 8 yes with Clear and Ortiz voting no.
No, not.
Okay, so the motion passes. Councilman Lesser, you were patiently waiting.
The only other thing I would point is we already have that issue with the bridge in response to, if it's a response to West Hills or response over there, we're already having to deal with that issue. So that's nothing new. The other advantage that you guys haven't pointed out too is, my understanding is part of the plan is moving the water rescue over to that, which gives us a huge response time advantage down to the ramp on the river for the water rescue unit, which then even becomes more important as this riverfront, thing takes off. If you want to talk a little bit about, I am correct, that's the plan.
Yes, we did check that. We did drive that and everything. We looked at access to the river where the ramps were, and it's not very appealing for us right now where the stations are. So to have access right down to the river ramp from that area, it's minutes away, and they're able to get the boats in the water quickly to respond downriver.
Thank you.
Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. Is this really two different issues? I mean, we're pretty well set on we need a station at 6th and Fairlawn someplace. And then the follow-on question is, do we close the other one or not? So, I mean, I'm just wondering if purchasing the property is step one, and step two is deciding what comes after that. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
But the problem is, step two is closing 11. I mean, if we get this, that's what's going to happen if we get the land. So I really want to work through that before we get the land, and then close 11. I just think those two will go hand in hand. And then I do want to ask, do we have guarantees from these townships that they can,
Sorry,
do
ma'am?
we have guarantees from the townships?
There's state, we follow the state
Mutual aid.
mutual aid, where they could call us or we could call them, and if they're available.
If they're available.
And it's the same with us. When they call us, if we're available, we're able to respond. And that's just the nature of the beast with mutual aid.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller, to be followed by Councilwoman Ortiz.
I have a short string of questions again. I asked the same question that Councilman Cohen did earlier today, and I did not get an answer, and I don't think he did either. And that was, what is the population growth projection for that part of the city? Because obviously we can't make it happen, but if we're trying to site an entire array of stations, as well as think about whether we need a different location, or think again about what's the best location, then knowing what the population growth is predicted to be is important, because these are expensive. So we don't want to wait 5 years and then say, oh, guess what? We have a long-range land use plan. We have an expectation of where we'd like to grow. And I would think, I personally have been asking for a master plan for some time, and we've never gotten it. So that we had looked at all of those, the land use planning, the locations. Nobody mentions, everybody talks about the last three before 2008, but the 2014 study that we had done says we don't need as many fire stations, and that we need to focus on prevention over just the old way of just looking at response time, particularly looking at areas that have very few calls and very few injuries or fires, because typically the properties that are farther out have been built to recent codes, and they don't have the same kinds of incidents. So focusing on making sure the hoarders aren't hoarding and the older properties are taken care of. So I want us to have looked at all of those elements to decide if we need one. I hear the compelling arguments growing. I just don't want us to make these decisions by budget. This is the only time we talk about it. And I don't think that's a good way to plan a system. Related to all that then, apparently we added the Mission Township Fire Station later because it was overlooked in the first mailing, and it's apparently just 5 miles from the location of this station. And then the station number 8 is just at 27th and Fairlawn, so only 20, 21 blocks away. Could you talk about what the, I don't know how to convert miles into minutes, but what, and I know the terrain varies, so what's the connection time from 27th and Fairlawn to where this station is, and from Urish?
21st.
Station 8, and I might say Mission Township is very close to our Station 12. Station
Right.
12 is probably 4 miles. So they are the actual companies that are running this area now, along with the Engine 7. That's where our 9-minute plus response times are coming from.
Okay.
So that would be how that equates to it.
What, if I may, the actual trip numbers for 11 are low. What's a norm that you ought to have in terms of trips? I understand forgetting response time for the moment. I mean, that's like 2 a week. Some of them are like one to 2 a week in terms of actual fire calls. That's not very many. And we do have to weigh that. I just wondered what a good load is for a fire station these days.
I can't answer
The-
that.
the-
A good day is when you don't need us.
That's right, that's what I was going to
Understood.
say. Yeah.
What we're trying to do is equal that workload out a little bit along with the response time. So their numbers are going to come up a little bit. The busier stations are going to go down a little bit so that that second in company, the redundancies there to make it more distributed about the city.
So when you look at national standards, the NFPA, and then we're looking at accreditation, they give guidelines. It's like a map that we follow to try to get to where we cover the city equally, and the capabilities for wherever you live, you're going to get the same type of response wherever you live, whether you're downtown, up north, west, south. And that's the plan.
Understood.
And just because 11s may not be as busy as some of the other stations on fire calls, you know, they have other specialty responses that they do. But we have to make sure that if a call comes into 11th District, we're going to have if they're out, someone else will be able to cover in a like time. And that's what we're trying to do, is equal out the response capabilities in the city with the same equipment and personnel.
Understood.
City
Sorry.
Councilwoman Ortiz, to be
Ortiz.
followed by City Manager.
Yeah,
Thank you, Madam Madam Mayor. That's why I voted no. I would just like the contact information for Sisters of Charities emailed to me, so I have it first thing in the morning. I would like to try to make contact with them again, and I don't know how we're making that contact. But
I tried multiple times.
Nikki Sloop's their
Over
public
months
information
and-
yeah,
officer.
Nikki Sloop is, yeah, so.
Call Nikki.
I sure will.
Messenger.
Because it's a shame that we lost that, if we could get that. Thank you.
City Manager.
The other thing I'll say is I actually believe that the site that we're looking at now is a better site.
Not if we can get one for free.
They were not talking, even when I had conversations with them concerning this, they were not considering free. So it would cost us. Based on my last conversation with the attorneys, they were not considering free.
Okay, then I
Billy.
guess I read in there that it said that we were not able to contact them. So
I
now
con-
you're saying you've
I
contacted
contacted,
them.
I've talked to their attorney. They said they would get their person back to me, and their person never responded to me over about a 5 or 6 month period. I've contacted their primary attorney. He said he would contact me. I have emails, so I've tried to reach them again, and they would not respond to call and have a serious conversation about the sale of their property.
Who's their attorney?
I don't remember the name. I
If
have
you
to-
can give me that attorney's name, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Lesser? No, Councilman Jensen.
Just spitballing here. At some point, could somebody sort out how much of a sales tax we would need to cover an additional fire station. I know you'd said the mill levy was around 1 and 1.5. And not even for tonight, if that could be equated into a sales tax. Yeah, I mean, because part of this conversation should be, do we need to add? I mean, we're struggling here to make sure we've got the city covered the way we think it should be. If that's the conversation we need to have, that we need to grow that and how to fund it, then, perhaps that's part of what we need to be considering as well. Because I do agree with you guys, we've got to provide more coverage. Moving assets is one thing, but if the truth of the matter is we really need more, then that needs to be part of the conversation as well. Thank you.
And my response to that is, my goal, when we had this discussion about, I did not have additional resources available. And so that's one of the things we're looking at here, is that additional resources were not going to be provided given our current budget situation. So we had to try and figure out a solution that improves overall coverage to the community, and this was the best solution that we could come up with. And so that's why it's being proposed, and that's why we're doing that. Now, if you have concerns as to whether or not that was a limiting decision-making process, then I need that, and because that could change what recommendation we have as to whether 11 closes. Does 11 need to be somewhere else? You give me additional resources to build another station in a different location of the community. So that changes the picture, but that's why the recommendation is what it is. We're using existing resources. Best improvement for all concerned was our issue.
Deputy Mayor?
I think it would help me if you let me know, you said you looked at all this, all the information, and this is what you decided. What was that information? How did you come up with this? I think that would help me.
This presentation was given to the city council at a previous council meeting, which talks about the response times and so on.
Okay, so you use the response times. That's it?
Response times and the ability for coverage, the changes that it would occur by having the station located there on the other stations. And so the response times is the biggest concern. Also, we looked at the amount of, it was considered related to population growth of industry valuation that's increased as a driver, that we've seen a building increase, because that's one thing we look at. If the building valuations are increasing in that area, that's an indication we have more structures that need to have fire protection. So those were things that were utilized. Excuse me.
Do you know how many calls you expect this new station to have?
We don't, till we know a location for that station. Then we really can't say that.
So how do you know you need it then?
We know if we put a station in this location, approximately what those
that's
calls
what I was
are. And I
asking.
do not have that number with me tonight, but
Can you give me that too?
sure.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Hill.
You mentioned, again, what this commitment might mean. I think the number we got in advance of the meeting was it might be another $1 million. You mentioned the
It's-
purchase price earlier, but
Oh, the purchase,
as part of that.
as far as the adjustment to the budget for this
Right.
particular construction project, I think
Right.
we're looking at
Yeah,
least
so
that.
the initial estimate we got from the architect was, when we add land costs, we add the design fees to move it to another site, and what we're seeing in the market construction value, the budget amendment could be $1 million for the project. And just to give you an example, we were over in KCK last week looking at a 3-bay station, which is smaller than this. It was a $5.8 million construction contract. So we want to give you a heads up that, the decision tonight, there is budget to buy land. There was already a CIP approved specifically to build a fire station on this side of town. So we're all working within previous approvals, but you are setting us on a path to come back to you for probably a budget amendment for construction.
Not quite yet, but yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you. Well, partly I asked because if I recall correctly, that original, we spent a lot of money on the design for the station that was supposed to be on the Sisters of Charity land. And if I recall, one of the reasons was that there was a serious rock ledge or something under it that took some pretty sophisticated design, and that quote made it more expensive. Now, and so I wondered, by moving it, are we having to design it all over again, A, and B, did we get rid of the rock ledge problem? I was thinking maybe we would have saved some money when we moved it to another site, but.
I mean, the short answer, there's some trade-offs. We are using the existing design, but so we're having the benefit of that previous design effort, but we're having to adjust building orientation, the site layout to fit the site. We don't have the excavation cost for the other site. We're having to look at stormwater and some other things on this site that were handled differently. So, I mean, there's trade-off on those costs, is the short answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
Seeing no further questions, we have more information to look for. So at this point in time, we move on to the public comment. Mr. Henry McClure, who has been patiently waiting.
Council, that's the biggest compliment, Henry McClure being patient. Thank you. It's a Christmas gift. I think it's perfect timing with creating the TIF district and a JETO meeting coming up to talk about White Lakes Mall. We got to make a decision as a community whether or not we want to save White Lakes. It's zoned I light industrial. It's never going to be a retail center again. Never. But you got to think about how White Lakes was developed. It was developed first by Sears, Penny's is its own building, Fowley's its own building, and there are 4 buildings kind of pieced together, all brand new at the time, to make what's now the enclosed mall. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see that video that I made, but I was in there the other day, and it was like being in like one of these zombie movies. It's terrible in there. The air is thick. It's not safe. From what I understand, there's an incident there every day. But you got an anchor there today in the Sears building. In 2006, I sold the Sears building to Mainline Printing, and I think Topeka actually made some money available for them to go there. And one of the most fun things about my job is to be able to like take a field trip and go, see how the business is doing. And from 2006 to today, Mainline Printing seems like it's doubled. I mean, they're fighting for every square inch, and I would like to invite you guys to come take a tour of Mainline Printing and come take a tour of White Lakes. One thing that we did, I was working for the Triple Net Properties that owned it at the time. I was doing the leasing, and I kept talking them into letting me sell the listing. And I sold Sears, and I sold the Taco John's, which is now Poncho's, which I developed. At that moment, we had to create what's called a reciprocal easement agreement. And that was something that the owner that owned the development parcel said that, well, we'll agree to it, much like a development agreement you have in a TIF district. But, and from that, you just decide, well, then this will be a place that I can still do business and cohabitate with a guy that still has a mind of its own. And now, what's going on in White Lakes? It's a crime. It's terrible. And to think that a developer would be told, well, you got to go to district court to get that REA enforced, that just doesn't make sense, and that's not fair. Because today there's safety issues. You talk about response time, there's safety issues for Mainline Printing today that if there's a fire in that building, they have to exit into the mall. That was part of it. There's safety issues today. You're putting a very good business at risk today, and the people that work in that building, because you can't go, if it were at 2 in the morning and you had to go and running in there because of a fire and it's dark and there's glass. It's a terrible situation. And it shouldn't, a new developer, see, you can't buy White Lakes to mall today because of the problems. There's too much liability, and you gotta come up with a plan. I'm not gonna take any more of your time because, but I am gonna ask you for a Christmas present. Record the development agreement for College Hill, because nothing's forever. That guy could sell that property and the new guy should have to live up with it.
Can I ask? I did watch that video, and I thank you for that. However, I agree with Mr. Buster, that was sad. I grew up in that place, and that was really sad to see. And you're right, we need to make it, that's been like that for years and years, and every time I drive by, I think, oh, God, that's so, you're right, I agree with you.
I went to work for the owners of White Lakes in 1983, and I traveled around the country renovating shopping malls. And what we need to do is we need to take it apart piece by piece. We need to go in and like take a layer of the onion off, and we need to see if we can save the corn shell, but we're not going to be able to do that until we take it apart. We're going to have to take it apart layer by layer. We're going to have to and the basement, there's probably 40,000 feet of black water. Where would you pump that out? Where would you put it?
Is that why it's called White Lakes?
No. Well, it wasn't bad. Good attempt. But could I have 1 minute?
So moved.
Second. All right, thank you. One minute. The stars are aligned. You gave me another minute.
Don't press. Use it well.
This is your Christmas present.
Merry Christmas.
I'll take it. Merry Christmas to you. With Jetto coming up, we've got to take money from Jetto. You shouldn't have carryover money in the bank. This is a good place to take Jetto money to redevelop White Lakes. You got a Jetto meeting coming up. You got carryover money. I'll just charge 2%. Everything, the administrative fee for everything we do around here is 2%. Put it up for an RFP, but McClure Real Estate will do it for 2%. But we need to take it apart piece by piece, see if we can salvage it. If you look at mainline printing, they actually might be a prospect to take some more space. They don't need it because they could just build on their 9.5 acres that they have from the original Sears parcel. But if we could clean it up good enough and we've got good storage space, just put a new roof on it, it could be viable. We're not going to know until we take off the layers of the onion. But thank you again. Merry Christmas. Don't forget White Lakes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point in time, we have announcements. City Clerk.
Okay, for December 17th, we have on the consent agenda, we have a resolution establishing city boundaries, a resolution establishing the 2020 governing body meeting schedule, and then we have the ordinance initiating eminent domain proceedings for the Watermaker sanitary sewer project. On action items, we have a zoning ordinance for 921 Southwest 10th Avenue, a real estate agreement for the new fire station, pending discussion. We have a policy and finance committee report and recommendation regarding chapters 9.20 discrimination and 9.25 for fair housing. 2021 social service grant priorities and budget recommendation, and then the 2021 social services grant outsourcing recommendation. And for non-action, we have a discussion on the acquisition and disposal of real property ordinance. That's an RPI process.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have 2 items tonight. The first one is the American Council of Engineering Companies of Kansas provided the city an award for the Kansas City Public Improvement Award for first place for over 50,000 population category. The project was in the Utilities Department. It was for the rehabilitation of the Lane High Service Pump Station. Our private partners on that were Burns McDonnell and CAS Constructors. So pretty nice. This is 4th year in a row, we've been able to take that award from the Engineering Council. So we're doing good projects here, and they're being recognized. Second item I had was Washington DC trip was a very good trip. We had good conversations with our representatives and senators, and we had a very good meeting, which will help us with going forward with the Polk Quincy Viaduct, meeting with the Department of Transportation, the Federal Department of Transportation, a couple of individuals there that talked about the grant programs that are available and a new financing program that potentially could help us with being able to have a lot lower costs of borrowing money in order to be able to help with the financing of this project, our end of the financing for our contribution. So excited to continue to pursue that with the group that's working on that project and hopefully find a way to continue to find a way to make that happen.
You took my thunder.
I'm sorry.
No. We had really good meetings in DC. I really don't have anything, Councilwoman Hiller.
I can't remember what I had at this
Yeah.
point, but everybody keep on trying to squeeze in a little Christmas between prepping for council meetings and JO meetings.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor, Councilwoman Ortiz, Councilman Emerson.
Just real quick, this morning I had the honor of going over to Shawnee Heights Elementary School. And first of all, kind of, more my speed there. But met with the sixth grade class, and they've actually done some conceptual things of Gage Park, a redo of Gage Park, including enlarging the zoo. And I'll tell you, I was blown away by how, what a great job these kids did. And probably no small part of Jim Martin was helping him as well, a retired engineer. So it was just fantastic. And actually, I'm going to try to get a PDF of that so I can print it out and bring it to all you guys, because it's really neat. But enjoyed my time over there this morning, and great job, kids.
Councilman Padilla?
Manage the zoo as well.
Just real quickly, a reminder that the Red Stocking Breakfast is this coming weekend. Some of us will be volunteering over there and serving if you get a chance to stop by. It's for a worthy cause. And encourage everybody to spend a little time maybe ringing a bell at one of the red kettles. I have some friends of mine who have done it a couple of years and kind of make it a family thing for the holidays. And so it's only for an hour. You can kind of pretty much pick your hours and your location. So if you get a chance, do like I do, find a place that's close to an indoor facility. But that's all I have, and thank you very much.
Councilman Jensen?
JADO's tomorrow night, here, 6 o'clock, very important meeting, hope to see you all here.
Councilman Dobler? Councilman Cohen? Councilman Lesser? This meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, all right.